again. Can you see this? Okay, beautiful. So this is the reading schedule, and just for those that joined, I've broken it down into easy asks for each month. So this month we're looking at rule 1 and 2, which I posted on the team, and then we're going to finish up the 1st of June and do kind of a celebration gathering at a restaurant in each district, where you'll be treated to dinner and I'll have some door prizes. And really the goal of this is just professional learning for each of you, in the hopes that you'll impart the knowledge that you're learning and take it back to your students. And like Lindy said, Lindy's from Dalhousie, and she said that at the start of the book, a lot of it she did know, but some of it is new, okay? And then I asked if you wouldn't mind doing the self-assessment quiz also on the team, just to kind of see where you land in your knowledge of all things financial literacy. And I have a lot to learn too. And you'll find as you get into the book a little more, it gets pretty heavy and pretty detailed. So I want to keep this as like user friendly as we can. So the first rule, just kind of the questions as I summarized it, is have your views of leasing versus financing a car changed after reading this chapter? So does anyone kind of want to speak to that? And it's just personal preference really. But has anyone's views changed of leasing versus buying? And if you're not, oh, Martha, go for it.
Why not?
Okay.
It's interesting because my parents have always said, buy a car, don't lease. Leasing is not bad, but you know what I mean, leasing is bad. And I'm in a situation now where my car is past its prime, and I'm looking around going, but so many people are leasing. Like maybe my parents don't really know, and they just think that because they're old school, and maybe leasing rates are great, and maybe I should be leasing a car rather than. And I'll also share that I've never had a new car, so
Yeah.
I haven't had the Japanese models that he's talking about, but I've always had a car that's probably about 3 years old. And just because of the pandemic, I find myself in a situation where I didn't get a newer one when I normally do. So now I'm in a little bit of a pickle, but I was wondering about the leasing, and I thought, well, maybe other people, maybe I don't really have a good understanding of it. So anyway, I guess it just goes to show that maybe my parents were right about that.
No, that's really good. I've never had a new car either. I've always bought a car 2 or 3 years old. But my sister loves leasing. Dad, do you have anything to add to this? You're the guru on this.
I'm no guru, but I will add this, that I agree with the author here that it's better off to buy a used car than buy a new one, and better off to buy than to lease, because depreciation is really a lot the first year. But that said, when I was practicing as a CPA, I leased my cars for the very reason that I could write them off against my practice income. And so it made sense. I could get back. I wrote my car off at 75% business and 25% personal, because I was using it going to clients. And so in that scenario, and when I've lectured before, I've done a mathematical template, I can remember, on leasing versus buying. And it turned out, unless you can write it off, you're better off to buy a vehicle. So that's my take on it. But in my case, as I say, because I could write it off and I could get back a portion of the HST, and you know, and I didn't have to deal with the depreciation. It made more sense. Now that I'm retired, I buy my cars and I don't buy new.
That's interesting. So I know in financial literacy courses, this is a piece that we teach, and a lot of students don't know the difference, and we do the pros and cons. So in leasing, we say, like, you get a new car every 4 years, you get a lot of warranty. But the cons would be like you have to watch your kilometers and things like that. So we really have like a deep conversation about that, which they appreciate, because they just don't know at that age. So anyone else have any thoughts on that? Anything they want to add? Suzanne?
Hi, yeah, I've got a question actually about it.
Sure.
My question is, so I hate buying cars.
Yeah.
I find it very intimidating going in there. And so I take really good care of my cars, but I tend to hang on to them really long, like 10 years or 9, 10, 11 years, depending. So that's different from what he has said to do. And what's your thoughts on that? Like, is that, because when I sell it, there's really not much money, you know, you can buy a little, you can get a little bit, but not much out of it. So what's your thoughts on that strategy?
So I do something similar. Like most of my cars, I try to keep up really well, and I buy them a couple of years old and I keep them for another 5 or 6. But just personally, I find when things start to go on them is kind of like, I don't like having to put a lot of money into them when things do start to go. So that's kind of my strategy. Does anyone else have one? Does anyone else kind of, yeah?
Things haven't gone on my car. It's not in a situation where they're going on it, but when I go in to sell it, it's not a whole lot of money coming out of it. It's
So
not.
I guess like maybe look at the opportunity cost of if you had to get a new one, like the car payment every month and what you'd be putting out monthly for a car payment versus how much you would get for the car upon the sale. I guess is kind of how I would look at it is the money that I'm pushing out in a car payment every month feasible for me versus if I get less for it when I sell it. I guess that would be my thought. Anyone else want to add anything to that one?
I have a principle, Jill, that I used to, when I was consulting to trucking companies and this type of thing, that you don't pour good money after bad. In other words, what you said, if it gets to a point where it's just a cash drain with repairs. But Suzanne, I liked what you said. I think the longer you keep them, granted, you don't get anything for a trade-in to speak of, but versus the the sunk cost of jumping into a new one every couple of years. I'm kind of a car nut, much to my chagrin, I guess. I love cars, and so I drive expensive cars, which I probably shouldn't, but it's a choice I make, and but I don't buy new. But anyway, my point is, if it gets to a point where it's just costing you a lot of money, then it's time to look at flipping it.
But what if it's not costing her a lot of money?
Well, in that scenario, you keep it. You know, Jill, as you know, we just traded Mom's car in, and it was It was a 13. So what's that? 8 years old, 9 years old, and we never had any problem with it, and probably shouldn't have traded it. But it was getting to that point because we were driving it to Florida. I thought, gosh, I don't want to break down on the interstate or something, so we flipped it for that reason.
Okay. Thanks, Dad. Any more? I saw someone else's hand up. Am I missing someone?
I think Michelle.
Okay, Michelle. Anything? Okay, maybe not. Feel free to pipe in. I'm just gonna, for time's sake, so that everyone can get home at a decent time. The second question, I guess, is just a reflection question. Like, do you think you have a lot to learn about financial literacy? And I guess with me is, if we do as adults, you know, it means that students definitely do. And this is something provincially, and my mandate, my role is to really promote awareness of financial literacy. So in my mind, it really starts with teachers and making sure that we know to the best of our knowledge how to be financially literate. So the second, does anyone want to share kind of whether they know more than they thought they did from the quiz and from the book, or if it was humbling to read? Heather Robinson. Hi, Heather. Go for it, Heather. You might be muted. Heather had her hand up. Okay.
There we go. I'm back. Sorry.
Oh,
I thought I hit the mic button, but I didn't.
That's okay. Good to hear
yeah,
from you.
so I am like full on in. I've already read the book like probably twice, and I've already contacted my financial planner, and she did all the things that the book said she would do. And I've already I'm moving all my money from where it is to a new place. And so I was like, I learned a lot from the book, and
Good.
I feel like kind of ticked off, to be honest, that I didn't know it before. So I've been telling all my students, like,
Yeah.
you guys need to know this stuff. And what
Yeah.
I'm telling them is totally like, they're 15, 16, they don't care. But
Yeah.
just even if it's just a little tidbit in the back of their mind at this
Yeah.
point, maybe they'll
Yeah.
remember someday.
I
That's
felt the
all.
same way thanks, Heather. After I read this book, I felt humbled because I'm also making changes with my saved money, and I think my dad felt the same way. Like, it was really eye-opening to realize how much we are paying out in fees, especially with mutual funds, and we'll get to that a little bit later. But thank you for that, Heather. That was great to hear. Anyone else before we move along? Okay. Laura. Laura, go for it.
I'll just mention my strategy has always been just to live frugally. And then I don't, have to worry so much, but I want to be more intentional. So I enjoyed what have enjoyed about this book so far is that the way he explains some of the terms, for example, dividends, totally understood it before, but the way he explained it, oh, that's a great way to make a connection for the students as well. So I'm definitely learning. Thank you.
Good. I feel the same way. Absolutely. Thanks, Laura. Okay, the next one, we're moving right along here. Andrew states that easy money is wasted money when he discusses the downfalls of giving your children money for a strong financial head start. So I think the example in the book was he talked about how students that were, or sorry, children that were given money, and houses bought for them or cars bought for them, or given a lot of handouts, actually fared worse in their careers. Like, I don't know if that's the exact paragraph, but that's kind of how I took it, is they don't as much learn the value of a dollar. And I know growing up with, like, how I grew up, I very much appreciate that because we did work and we did learn the value of a dollar. And I'm finding, I don't know if you all do as teachers, but I'm finding, like, I'm 15 years in, and there is that kind of a sense of entitlement, more so now. And students seem to have a lot more, like, fake eyelashes and cars and nails. And sometimes I would just ask them, like, how do you afford these things? And so anyway, any thoughts on that one? Lindy.
I tend to agree with that because that's how I grew up. I'm 55, and I mean,
Yeah.
even my children, we had a farm and they had to work, they had to do chores to earn money. And you see, their friends who didn't have to do anything just took it for granted that their parents would just pay for things. And I taught internationally for 10 years. And one of the biggest places I saw that was Egypt, because there was a lot of money with these kids. And that sense of entitlement was huge.
Yeah.
And, they'd crash up a car, do something, and they knew that their parents would just pay for it.
Yeah.
So like, to me, if my son or daughter or whatever crashed a car, then okay, you're going to work to pay that off.
Yeah.
And I just found that they ended up, my son is, in Alberta now, he's 26 and he's ranching and running his own ranch, and it's because of money he has saved and invested in cattle and things like that. Like, we never gave him any money at all. So he worked hard for what he got at a young age. So I don't know. I do see that. And I know that this is, you can't, one blanket fixes in everybody, because you can't stereotype that, because there are kids that their families have set them up and they've done very well for themselves based on decisions they made afterwards. So, it can work both ways, but I do tend to agree that easy money is wasted money for sure.
Yeah, agreed. Anyone else? Thank you, Lindy. Anyone else have thoughts on that one?
There's a comment in the chat there from Laura Webster, says, I wonder what students would say about this statement.
Yeah. That's a great discussion point, though, when talking and teaching them about financial literacy. Like, what are their thoughts, and maybe thinking about if they knew their parents' journey. And a lot of students that do have part-time jobs do appreciate the value of a dollar, I find, when they are working in high school. So that's a great rich conversation point for sure. Okay, so we are 10 to 4. We're moving right along. This is great. We're going to move on to rule 2. And Andrew talks about in this rule how the investment industry works to kind of profit at the expense of us. And he really is not a fan of mutual funds, that's for sure. And he's a huge fan of low-cost index funds. And like Heather, you were probably alluding to this if you have mutual funds, and not that they're bad, but it's a little bit eye-opening sometimes to see the fees that we do pay for our funds to be managed. On the other hand, to manage our own funds through Questrade or something like that, some of us, wouldn't have the time or expertise. So it's an interesting point. So just looking at question 1, how can we educate students about the investment industry and the different types of investment professionals, such as brokers and advisors? So my take on this, I guess, is that when I went to high school, none of this was talked about, period. But I think it would be neat. And I know if I go back to the classroom someday, I would definitely educate my students a little bit more on brokers, advisors, things like Questrade, just to give them that knowledge. And it's funny because I have taught grade 12 for most of my career, and I do find that my students are so interested in the stock market, and they're just so eager for that knowledge. So I guess the more I know as a teacher, the better. Any comments on that? No? Okay. Lindy? Sorry.
Your last sentence just rang home for me. The more you know as an educator, the better you can help them. Because when I did that survey, that is where I got a red, is knowing about the investment industries and what's going on around me. So that was kind of humbling for me to be able to, as an educator, be able to help other people. I need to fill myself in on what I need. The other stuff, I was all green, I'm fine, but that part about being aware of what's happening and how to make investments and what you should do. Like I would fail very sadly at teaching students right now in that area, because I would have, but then that would help me, wouldn't it? If I had to go through and teach myself in order to teach them, it would be a good learning experience for me.
Absolutely. And even like I was chatting with my dad a lot about this book because I made him read it so that he could like kind of assist me with this book study. And Dad, I know that after you read the book, you were kind of like rethinking some of your strategies. And I know you're retired now, but do you want to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, first of all, let me just say to all of you, I think it's wonderful that you're looking at this. It's something that's never taught in the schools. It's something that's never really thought about, I guess. And even when we get into our working lives, so oftentimes we become busy with our careers, with our families, and the mindset is, well, if I put money away, I'm going to be fine, and not even thinking about the strategy. And it was a bit of an eye opener. I've never been a fan of mutual funds. I do have some in my RSP and my wife's, but I've never really been a fan. And when I started to read the book and saw where in Canada, the commission for mutual funds is the highest among all the countries basically in the world. The brokers love them because they get commissions going in, going out, trailing fees, and all the rest of it. And so it was a bit of an eye opener. I've always tried to balance ours. He talks about that as well in the book, how you balance with fixed income vis-a-vis bonds and some stocks and this type of thing. I will say this, with index funds that he talks about, they're very volatile. And in this world we live in right now with war in Ukraine, and one politician says this or the governor of Canada says that, it's up and down like a yo-yo. It's not for the faint of heart. And but all of you people are probably young enough that you'll ride through this. In retirement, it's a different story, and I have to be cognizant of that and try and rebalance. So, but I've actually rethought some of the mutual funds we have and thought, gosh, maybe I better put more into bond fund than I have.
Yeah, and we'll get we'll get deeper into these kind of topics because they are a little bit more complicated as we go, which is why I'm so glad to have my dad here because I do have knowledge, but he's like a complete guru on this stuff. So anyway, so I guess question 2 and 3, like again, is just helping students understand the difference between bonds and mutual funds and index funds. And that starts with us understanding the difference and the pitfalls and the benefits. And just having students, like I remember I did a stock market simulation a few years ago at St. Malachy's where I taught. And, students would get so into it. And one day, one of my grade 12 boys came in and he said, I just put all of my money from, my savings account into this stock. And I just thought, oh my goodness, like be careful. Like this is a simulation. This is pretend money. So I want to make sure that what I'm teaching, I'm guiding them properly. But they do get so excited about this. So and this isn't everyone's interest, but those of us on here, I'm assuming that we have a vested interest in teaching financial literacy or business courses. So I think it's really important, as we go forward, to be educated. And that's kind of the last that I'm going to say. I know that we have 5 minutes left, so I'm just going to open up the floor to any comments, concerns, clarifications from the group. I'm going to stop sharing here so that I can see people's faces. Anything that anyone wants to add? I so appreciate you guys being on the call today in this bad weather. Hi, Peter Kelly. Oh, Martha, is your hand up or was that from earlier? I'm just seeing the chat again.
So I put it up again just to add to the conversation.
Yeah.
But you made a comment about the high school students and working, and my experience too.
Yeah.
A lot of the students are working and a lot of them are treating it as disposable income.
Yeah.
And it's, you just have to caution them because sometimes they don't realize that, once they do get bills and additional responsibilities, they maybe won't be able to get their eyelashes or their nails. Or I remember I had one student, and this was years ago now, and she was saying, that she really wanted to go on the Europe trip that some of her friends were going on, but she just didn't have the money. But she was going to Starbucks and spending $5 something a day on some kind of Starbucks drink. And I said to her, do you realize that's $25 a week if you're buying just one? And I think some days she was buying more than one. And I said, that's $100 a week, or, $100 a month. And, you could be saving that money. And she said to me, oh, I really never thought about it. So, I think instilling these are just getting our students to reflect on some of their spending habits as well.
Absolutely. And if anyone's read The Automatic Millionaire, David Bach speaks to that as the latte factor. And it's like anything, it wouldn't have to be coffee. It's like your vice. What are you throwing money away on every week or every month that could add up over time? Thanks, Martha. That's a great point. And I'm so excited to see some of my colleagues that jumped on here. Peter Kelly is our strategic partnership lead, and Ransford Lockhart's our experiential learning lead. So that's great. Any other final comments? We have 2 minutes left. This has been absolutely wonderful. I'm going to post our reading schedule again in the chat. And I'm going to book some reservations at restaurants in each district for our final hurrah. That will be really fun. Any other comments, Lindy? Is that your hand up?
Yes, I was just going to add to what that person just said before.
Yeah.
One of the quotes that stood out for me at the very beginning of the book was, your perceptions dictate your spending habits. And that I highlighted that right away. I think that's the first thing I highlighted. And so I agree 100% that, these, with the kids especially, if they have a perception that they need to keep up with the Joneses, then they're going to continue to spend money. And by the way, my maiden name was Jones, but but no, that's why I like that quote. But no, they need to, look at where they're at, and whether, because the next line down, it says, if you alter your perspective to be satisfied with what you have, then you won't be as tempted to blow your earnings. And that
Exactly.
speaks volumes. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I see in the chat, thanks, Lindy. I see in the chat, Michelle says, one of my favorite tricks is a no spend list. I tend to buy many of the same things. I make a list of what I don't need to buy. Very good tip, Michelle.
You know, Jill,
Yeah,
can I just add that Jill
yeah,
warned me not to talk too much because she said, Dad, don't monopolize the conversation. So I've tried to be quiet, but
you've
you
done
know,
great.
well, no, I think it's wonderful, the conversation you are all having. And part of the problem today is that our culture is so counter to wise investment decisions, to wise spending. And so many times people spend according to what their wants are instead of their needs. And he mentions that in the book, and that's something I've used in giving lectures at UNBSJ to med students and that type of thing. So you know, we watch HGTV. I don't know if any of you watch that, but young couples, you know, they go into a house that doesn't have the granite countertop, it doesn't have the big screen TV, it doesn't have this, it doesn't have that. And I'm thinking, hey, gosh, when I was married 47 years ago, my wife and I worked to get these things. It wasn't, you know, right at the get-go. But that's what our culture says today. So we need to be careful about that.
Absolutely. Well, everybody, it's 4 o'clock. This has been like just incredible, especially with a snowstorm happening outside. I'm so grateful for your participation, and I'm excited for things to come in this group. And I want to thank Dad from Florida. Thanks for joining. And this was just fantastic. So I hope everyone gets home safely. And anytime, reach out, email, even if you have questions, like share them in our chat. I'm sure if one of you has a question, more than one do. So have a great day, everyone. Thanks so much. And I'm going to stop the recording here. Okay. Beth, thanks for joining, and Peter and Ransford.